Hey guys, welcome back. It's Elucid, and we have the final turn for our game, friggin' Allstars. And I have a message sent out to the world. It says, trying to claim the last throne this turn. If it doesn't say I've ascended, it means Grippazon has won a major battle. Either way, it's been fun playing with you guys. And message from Grippazon, YOLO. So, this turn actually, so this is kind of funny. We send a Harmonica Golem on top of this King of Elemental Earth. And he gets yeeted. And then there's a bunch of things that don't really matter. Tax here. This, I believe, is the big battle. And this actually is going to be a clusterfuck of a battle. We both mess up so many things. These guys don't cast turn 1 anti-magic, which is probably the single most important thing for them to do. And we don't bring Light of the Northern Star, the artifact. I was debating who to put it on, and I assumed I put it on somebody. I guess I didn't. I guess it slipped my mind. And that means my turn 0 Master and Slaves don't go off. But it turns out not mattering because he didn't cast anti-magic. It probably wouldn't have mattered anyway. He also kills some Master Brains here up at the front, or some Brains in a Jar with this first wave of Iron Blizzards. But we have Arrow Fend off now, so we're more resistant. Fog Warriors is off. If we look at our Communion slave situation, we have 34 slaves, though. Which means we actually might have been able to cast it. Magic boost to 5. Actually, oh wait, no, they had to be 9. Right? Oh wait, timeout. I can't remember if it's 8 or 9. 8. No, they should have been able to cast it. Holy shit. My not having Light of the Northern Star shouldn't have mattered. Oh wait, no, it did, because I think that was only that many. Once my other guys entered in, yeah, it's 24 to start with. Once other people had jumped up. So, yeah. If we had Light of the Northern Star, we would have turn 0, Master and Slave. Like, that would be right now. We'd already have half the army. But we didn't, because we were idiots. It's that item sitting in my inventory. But we outnumber him 3-1. We get a ton of blesses things off turn 1. He's got a lot of stuff off, too. He's got all the resistances. He's got Will of Fates going. I think he has Life After Death. He's spamming out Iron Blizzard. And first round of Master and Slave goes off. You can see we steal a bunch of his stuff. And that's going to cause a ton of chaos. And then the next round goes off. And you can see we now have most of his stuff. And we have Thunderfend cast. I was thinking to do Wrathful Skies. He did some send to, send to, I don't know, Hell or whatever it is. Kokitos or Inferno. But I don't think that matters much. And he's getting very close to being HP routed now. Doesn't have Fog Warriors off yet. But yeah, these guys not having anti-magic turn 1 was a major problem. He was saying he scripted it. I don't know what he did to mess up. It was probably part of a communion they got hosed. I'm not sure, like, this guy could have cast it. I don't even know. And that's it, boys. So even though we fucked up, we still won it. The final report, we killed, well, all of his stuff that he ever made. A bajillion mages. Yeah, it was kind of no contest. And like I said, we fucked up really bad. But it ended up not mattering, because he fucked up too. I think even if he did get anti-magic off, it would have still been a stomp. We would have lost significantly more, because the battle would have gone on longer, but I think it still would have been a stomp, I think. But like Fire, he was doing Firestorm. That did come up by the end. But we had turn 1 Firefiend and stuff go up, so it wouldn't have mattered. Yeah, so that's it. And then if we scroll down, we've claimed victory. Because we claimed all the turns. So, we've had all the turns we needed for a long time. Everybody got to have the fights they wanted to have. And I didn't want to drag it out. So, like, once these guys were done, and once these guys weren't attacking us that much, that's when I was like, okay, well, what do y'all think about us going for thrones? And everybody's like, yeah, go for it if you can. And that was cool. It gave these guys kind of like a thing to mobilize around, a victory condition. Come in and take this. If they stopped it, it would be good. Mammon actually did not die the whole time. And I'm not sure why the elves moved off Elshu. I think they should have gone over here and conquered him, because if I was moving on top of this throne, I guess is what scared them. But I don't think I could have taken this. I didn't have enough mages. Now, I could have flown in the mages or something. They didn't know that. But, well, I guess it made sense. Yeah, because if Grippazon took this from me and I took this, then I would still win. So I guess that made sense for them to come over here. But I don't know. I personally would be like, in Elshu's position, be like, I need to take this to advance my position. And I'm going to just be counting on other people to get me, like, to stop the game from ending. Because they really need this cap. I mean, they also need the game not to end, I guess. But anyway, I checked with them too. Everybody here I let know before it happened that, like, hey, because them I had kind of promised this throne. I was like, guys, y'all are taking forever to get this throne. Y'all, and I'm fighting everybody. I've kind of won these wars. Do you want me to just try to go for thrones? And they were like, yeah, I'd go for it. So, anyway, I think that's kind of the most fun way for the game to end. It's just, and like, not to say throne rushing is wrong. I think it's a legit way to win too. But it is disappointing, like it's not as much fun, I don't think. So anyway, everybody got to have their fights, and then we got to have this climactic battle at the end. And then, yeah, we're going to do next episode. I think we're going to do like a round table where we'll have everybody kind of chit-chatting, talking about things, sharing their experiences of the game. I'm going to do my after-action review here, and then that round table I think will be more focused on their perspectives. I think from the beginning of the game, I think the nations with the strongest drafts were like us and Mammon. By a pretty good margin. I don't think that means we were the only two that could have won, but we both kept each other alive, or didn't want to kill each other, maybe is another way to look at it, as a hedge because we knew if we killed each other, then whoever was remaining would be public enemy number 1. So we didn't want to do that until we each felt we were strong enough to hold off everybody else, I think. Like, we had kind of said this much to each other, too. That was certainly how I felt. I think that was also how they felt. So, in some ways, it's kind of like two undead or pop kill nations trying to keep each other alive, because they know if the other one dies, then they'll be the only pop kill nation left for everybody to focus on, right? So that was kind of the important mechanic, I think, for us early. For the game state, though, like, once the fact that these guys died so fast was like, everybody in the game needed that to not happen. And so I was trying to find people to vulture. Like, I was trying to anybody to vulture Mammon, anybody to vulture Cetalis. Nobody would. So one of the ways people could have curbed that was by helping vulture, right? But people didn't want to help me by vulturing, so they didn't do that. But it would have been good for the game state if they could have, but people were like busy in other wars and stuff. So it wasn't just like they chose not to, it was also like they didn't really have the resources to. But yeah, it was us conquering both these guys at the same time that really made this, like, once this started happening, the game state was going pretty out of control. And everybody was patrolling everywhere because there was a lot of blood, a lot of good patrollers, a lot of free spawn. The scouting network was really bad, so it was really hard to know what was happening for everybody in the game. So, like, people knew we were winning, but they didn't know how hard we were winning the war, the 2v1. I think like, Vinland had a really solid build. They had a rough expansion. Like, here you can see it was flat for a while. They, like, completely failed the expansion at a point. And they ended up, like, they'd negotiated borders with us that it took them forever to take, but they eventually took it. And then they went to war with Dongerland and got some more stuff. And then they were flat for a really long period of time. This nation is a tempo nation, and they really needed to like keep going. So, they could have like attacked, us, or they could have attacked the elves right at the beginning. I think we were a very good matchup against them basically the whole time. Like, you don't want to run Centaur Warriors and then the kind of Bless that they had on their Van here. You don't want to run those into Gamherdings plus Long Dead. It was not going to be pretty. I don't know how I haven't really spent time thinking about how they would match up versus the elves, but they needed to do something. And they were just too slow on all the things. Like, they were slow in kicking Underwater out. Like, they could have started the war where they kicked Underwater out probably like 5 or 6 turns earlier. And that would have allowed them to start their next war 5 or 6 turns earlier as well. But then, even once they had kicked Underwater out, they were pretty slow about what deciding to do next. Like, they needed either to go after the elves or go after me. I think we were going to be the harder war for them. So I think going after the elves probably would have made more sense. It was going to be a hard war for them either way, but they just needed a bit more momentum. But they have a really cool build for the nation. I think if I were to play this game again, I would probably play it with their nation. Because it just seems like a ton of fun to play. It's such a cool build. So much stuff you can do. But this is a mod with like tremendously strong nations. So there you go. So anyway, that's Vinland. Elshu, they were just getting trounced by the Morvarks, right? And then things kind of stabilized as the Morvarks got 2v1'd. I think Hue jumped in, and so did Mammon. Or I guess 3v1 technically. And then they kind of recovered, getting their land back. And then later they almost doubled in size from this war with Mammon. I was surprised they didn't have more gains sooner, but it makes sense. Mammon was pretty far ahead of them in terms of province size. But you can see, like, as they started making gains, Mammon started losing some stuff. But, yeah, I think for them, the ticket, and I don't know any of the details about how they would do it. It was just when they got in this war with Mammon, they needed to make more gains faster, right? And I don't know what the things they would need to enable that were, but I think that was what they needed. Next, we're going to look at Imperia. They kind of got conquered early. There's not too much to say there. I think they just kind of had a really slow, weak expansion where they, even though they got a decent amount of land, not a lot, they didn't really have armies because they were expanding a lot with gladiators. And so, most nations are going to build up troops over the course of expansion. Like if you look at us, you can see we were building up troops. It's hard to see because the line's so small, but you can tell it's diagonal going up. These guys, it was like very much more flat at the beginning. And you need to be building up troops as you're going. Like even these guys, even though it's really flat, you can kind of see it's sloping up. So anyway, that was what happened. They got conquered. Dongerland, they expanded very aggressively. Like compare that to us. They were bigger than us by the end. And part of this was attacking Imperia. Compared to the elves, they were way bigger. Their other neighbors was Grippazon. They were way bigger then. And so basically when you're bigger than all of your neighbors, and they also, I think, were like very blustery in their Diplo. Like I know they kind of pissed off Grippazon in their Diplo just because they were like, we'll do what we want. We're going to take this, or you don't want to mess with us, right? And you have to be careful doing that because, like, if you say, you should be scared of us, like, not everybody's always scared of you, So I don't know. I think they had kind of weird Diplo. But the net effect was a lot of people decided that they wanted to attack them. And I think a lot of this was they didn't have a lot of, like, their whole thing was these, like, super scary sacreds. But everybody had a bless that was designed to kill super scary sacreds because there were so many super scary sacreds in the game. And they didn't have many super scary sacreds. A lot of this land that they had gotten was like through mercenaries, which, went away eventually. And then they were kind of limited into how many sacreds they could produce. And when everybody looked at them, it was just like, y'all don't have much stuff, but y'all have a ton of land. And that was kind of what made everybody want to attack them. So that was, I think, was the story of Gripperland. They had to play really aggressively, though, so it made sense that they would try to get really big. I don't really dock them for that. But I think they were spread thin, and I think everybody noticed it and took advantage of it. So, I don't know what the solution is. I don't know if you expand slower, but you either want to have more military stuff, or if you can't manage it, you don't get quite so big quite so fast. Because they definitely looked like kind of food. And for our side, we vultured part of them too. And they were trying to get everybody to attack us. Like, all of our neighbors who I was diploing with were like, Dongerland really wants people to attack you. And we're like, damn, okay. So we had no compunction at all about getting our knives out when it came time to eat them. Pinpappy, they were in a, I think, really the story of them and El Shu is they were in a back and forth thing all through expansion. And I think this part of this is just why you want to be really careful getting into an early first war. Like, if you're going to get into a war like turn 8 or 9, you really want to make sure you're prepared to outright kill the other player. And quite frankly, even though Pinpappy was winning this war against El Shu, which I think the army graphs will maybe tell. No, they don't really tell. Anyway, it was a mutually destructive war, right? They got in it too early, and it wasn't decisive enough. So, and then Mammon, I think, got to pick who they stabbed. And I think if Mammon stabbed El Shu instead of Pinpappy, then Pinpappy would have survived. But Mammon just chose to attack Pinpappy, and so they were the ones that got knocked out. So I think it's like they were in a mutually destructive war, and then whichever one Mammon attacked was going to lose. And it just so happened it was Pinpappy. But they had a pretty cool build. Too bad we didn't get to see it play out all the way. Cetalis, I kind of already went through over in Diplo what I thought about their position. But I think they needed to control Earthblood Depot and Riches. I think if they did that and they were really slamming hard on the Knights, they would have done better. They were playing also, I believe, with Drain. And they were pretty rich, compared to us. They were the same income as us the whole game. Even though they were a bit smaller than us. So I don't know. I think they played pretty good. I think the problem was they needed, if they needed the globals, right? And then on top of that, they needed to take some of these wars when they had some very critical timings. And there's some things that were kind of contradictory. They needed to build a lot of this momentum they didn't have the same kind of scaling mechanics other nations had. So they needed to be in position 1 or 2, or maybe 3, right? But they needed to be the big dog kind of. But to do that, they needed to have certain tech online at a certain time. It was hard to have that with the drain scales. And then furthermore, based on kind of how they had built their nation, a lot of it, even though they had these good sacreds, they didn't have a Hellbless, right? So they had sacreds that were designed to kind of survive and shield the Mage Core, while the Mage Core would do a bunch of heavy lifting. And sure, the sacreds would do stuff too, but they didn't have a super killy bless for the sacreds. I think the idea was the mages would kill most of the things. The problem with this, though, was that to go out and to get big, to get in position 1, they needed to mobilize a lot of their Mage Core, which is risky because your mages could die, as we saw. But also, when you have to mobilize so many mages to do Iron Blizzard and stuff, that kind of retail evocation, it slows a lot of your momentum down. When you have to mobilize 60 mages in an army in the mid game, I mean, that's painful even if you win. And then if you lose those mages, oh my god, you're out of steam. And that's kind of what happened to them. So, I think they played it pretty well. I think it was just a scaling issue, right? They had to, because they didn't have a ton of scaling in the draft, they had to have a lot of scaling in the build. They had to have a plan for getting the globals to help scale, and then they needed to hit certain timings and leverage that with their Mage Core and their troops. And I think they just kind of misfired there a little bit. Yeah. I do think at the end, just because of, I think they were right about assessing this particular nation's sanatorium as being a major threat. Had a super scary draft. So I think it made sense for them to want to 2v1 us. I think just where all the pieces were, and given how they didn't know all the things we could do. I mean, we did, but I think it would have made sense for them to still team up with us against Mammon. I mean, not only do you never want to be in a war that you're not going to win, and so in that sense, it would have been better to, if they weren't ready to fight us then, it probably makes sense to delay it. While they're also more powerful once they've gotten this other stuff, the stuff from Mammon or whatever. But also, like, if you're not ready to fight a war, you're not going to be gaining assets from fighting it. Like, they were annoying to us, and they certainly contributed in the 2v1, but honestly, they probably would have contributed more by staying our friends and taking Mammon land that otherwise would have been our spoils, right? So, I don't know. I think they made the wrong decision at the end to 2v1 us, but we ended up having really good fights against them. They had some really cool... I mean, the whole idea of, like, the artillery mage blob with the Sacred supporting him was really cool to see. It didn't do well against the battlefield wipes, but anyway, it was really cool. And then Mammon was terrifying, man. They were really scary. I think some people saw some of the Mammon fights and they were like, oh man, they kind of bungled a lot of the scripting. What they don't realize is we were picking off stuff with Shaitan or magic phase interrupting movement. So Mammon actually had a real hard time getting the kind of fights that they wanted. And like the first really important fight where we were expecting it to have a Pyrrhic victory, we ended up having a decisive victory. And that was because he didn't get Divine Blessing off because we had interrupted movement. So, yeah, they had a super scary build. They got outplayed a couple times, and then that kind of, the advantages from that piled up, and all of a sudden they were behind the wheel. But if they had won our war decisively, I think they probably had a very good shot at winning the game. And it would have been really hard for anybody to stop them. It basically would have been entirely on Cetalis to stop them. And I don't know if they'd been able to. They might have. Next, we had Korvekian. The underwater power we all wished had won, but they didn't. I don't think they would have actually been particularly better set up to deal with Sea of Ice. However, I think they were a much more diplomatic nation. I would have expected that GC would have sweet-talked some of the land neighbors, whereas everybody knew that Ankaryarkos was not going to be friendly. They were just going to attack all of the coastal nations, or some of they were always going to be fighting. Raiding, and nobody wanted that. So it was everybody immediately organized to not let this happen. Even nations which wanted to fight each other kind of made peace. We broke bread over not letting Ankaryarkos have the column. And oh boy, was it a good idea. One thing we didn't really realize until the end of the game was just how good of a position Ankaryarkos was in. Like here in the mid-game. This is when they were eating Hue. They were 20% bigger than everybody else. And they hadn't even eaten all of Hue yet. If we had let them eat all of Hue, they would have been like up here right at this time. And by that point, they would have become entrenched, and then they would have immediately been raiding Grippazon, and I don't think they would have raided Mammon unless Mammon attacked them, but they would have been raiding Grippazon and Maryland or Vinland. They probably would have gone after them one at a time, I'm guessing, so they probably would have left Vinland alone. But it would have just been complete cancer, and it totally made sense for Grippazon to want to deal with them, not only by putting Sea of Ice up, but also by not letting them have Hue before that state evolved. Because, yeah. Anyway. But this was like there's an alternate world where Sea of Ice didn't go up, and then they end up being like a complete cancer on the world. And I'm very glad that that alternate reality didn't happen, because I wasn't even coastal for most of the game, so I didn't have any ability to really influence that except to vulture off people they would attack. So we were certainly not happy about these guys potentially running away with the game, and we're happy to contribute stuff to Sea of Ice. So anyway, but yeah, we all were rooting for Korvekian to win. Nobody wanted Ankaryarkos to win, but they did. They did. And they put a ton of time into figuring... I mean, it's amazing that they won this matchup against the Knights of the Deep. It started with the baiting them into attacking their cap where they PD dumped. But I think after that, they still kind of continued to outplay Korvekian a little bit. But in this matchup, too, they were behind in research for basically the whole war. Korvekian was a bit ahead. So, and also they had a god, which was patrolling with like a bajillion HP they couldn't kill, on top of all the cap PD. That was kind of the seal the deal play that really killed it for Korvekian here at the end. But this was a kind of cool thing. If I haven't put it already, somebody ping me, and I'll put a link to HP Munchcraft and Dark Wolf. They basically, I don't know how much of the series they'll have put up, but they'll have put up at least part of their perspective. And it was really fun, and they're really entertaining too. So go check them out. It was funny. Anyway, that's Korvekian and Karyarkos. They got locked in the sea. It's basically the funniest part of this whole game was them getting locked by Sea of Ice after talking a bunch of shit about how they're going to raid people and never stop fighting. Oh, we don't do any Diplo. Yeah, it's because you're trapped under Sea of Ice. It's still funny to me. Anyway. Yes, the great underwater raiding threat that was not to be. And then we have Grippazon, the champions of Sea of Ice. I think they made a lot of good plays. I think basically at every phase in the game, they did the right move. They could have... I was asking them to vulture Cetalis. If they had done that, I think that would have been good for them. Because basically we would have been like down here if they had vultured Cetalis. Like I don't know if they had the resources, but if they had the resources to take Cetalis' cap, I think that would have been good for them. It would have knocked our graph down to about here, and it would have put their graph up at about here, right? So they would have been much more evenly matched to fight us. I don't think they had the resources to do that, though. I don't even think it was like them not trying to help us, which was another thing to worry about. Like, do you want to help us? Because we were, at this point, pretty clearly coming into position 1 with a very scary national lineup. So I think it made sense for them to not want to help us. But, I mean, that's the thing. Like, vulturing the people we're eating isn't exactly helping us. I mean, it's a way for us to stay friendly, but while also allowing them to kind of suck power away from us, which we were totally cool with. But anyway, and then since they didn't vulture, it would have been ideal if they attacked a couple turns sooner. But honestly, they were getting attacked by the elves. They talked the elves into not attacking them and instead joining against us, which was the absolute right move at that point in the game. So I don't know. I think they played it really well. Ultimately, Dominions comes down to, though, can you win the battles? And I think when you look at us, we just won all the battles. We did a good job of winning all the fights. So, I mean, we got 2v1, and then 2v1, and then 2v1 at the end, and it was just at the end that we fought everybody, And, for part of it, we had a major... I mean, for the beginning part, like here, there was no major economic advantage. We were, compared to everybody else, we were about the same size. We were in a good position, but we weren't in any way like a breakaway position through the first half of the game. Like, there were 4 of us that were like all here in the middle, right? And we weren't in any like super clear leading position exactly. We did have pretty good gym income though. Though we weren't number 1. I think Mammon was number 1 for gym income. They did I guess better site searching or had better luck. But then when we took Mammon's land, our gym income went crazy. So, yeah, I don't think in any way we were position 1 in the mid game. It just came that once all the fighting happened, we were winning the fights. And, yeah, I mean, that's part of how you win Dominions. So, I think we had a really cool draft. It was a really hot... I mean, there was so much cool stuff you could do with our draft. So many different threat vectors, so many things for people to worry about. We could do completely different stuff every battle. Our mobility was awesome. It just felt like a really strong nation. So I think we had an amazing draft and we played it pretty well. Is what it came down to at the end. But other people had really strong drafts too, and there's some really cool fights. But we also had a really strong power curve. I don't think like attacking us early. There were not many nations that I think had times where attacking us early was going to be an easy thing to do. Like we're always going to be able to defend ourselves pretty well. I think the solution, like I think the way to have won this game against us, I think is either you could have gotten all our neighbors to attack us early, which would have sucked. I don't know if we would have died. I mean, a bunch of Gam herdings with Melquarts and Imp Spam and stuff, that it could have knocked us down, but I think we would have ruined all our neighbors' games and they would have been eaten by other people. And we would have just been in a shitty start after they all got eaten. I think we could have really defended ourselves against almost like a 4v1 and not died. I mean, Gam Herding's 10 a turn is just so ridiculously strong. And then Imp Spam early with Bloodlust is really strong. And we were ready to do all that. I think that a plan to beating us would have been... I mean, either you could have outplayed us in the battles, which certainly could have happened. There were many times that could have happened, right? So if we were losing the battles, we would have lost. I think the other thing, like just at a strategic level, not like tactically winning battles, but at a strategic level, just being bigger than us, right? So like out-eating us and then getting to that, almost all games reach this part at the end where there's like 3 or 4 powers left and they have to decide what to do next. I think you get to the point where there's like 3 or 4 big powers that are all equivalent or bigger than us. And then, especially, this is going to be hard to do if Mammon's one of those, because you have to be really careful about making a deal with Mammon, just because they scale just as hard as we do. Same way you have to be careful about making a deal with us, because our nation scales so well. But assuming, I think you try to get, like, ideally a game state where you eliminate Mammon, and there's 4 powers left, and they all attack us at the exact same time. And that would have been hard for us to survive. We might have. But as it turned out, we ended up fighting kind of like 2v2s rather than like a 1v4. And a 1v4 would have been a lot harder at the end with nations that were bigger, equal size than us. So I don't know. I think that's probably the way to do it. And there's also just like alternative realities we didn't see play out. Like, I think if Vinland scaled really hard, like if they were more aggressive in the early mid game and they got their research booming with the lanterns and stuff, they could have had some really amazing timings. And that could have been really cool. But alas, hard to know how all these things would have happened. It was a really fun game. One thing that a lot of people so it was really fun playing with everybody. People were super friendly. Really cool seeing people's builds and ideas. I loved watching the Cetalis, like, artillery doom stack. That was super cool. The health build was super cool. I think they didn't really get to fully... Well, first of all, by the time they attacked us, we had life for life, so thugs were not a thing. But, yeah, it was still super cool. They had Dance of the Morgans and other things for Wailing Winds and... like Big Fear plays. Super cool build. And they were just slow. But it's still really cool to see and really cool to theory guys. I love how they came up with it. These guys, Grippazon, everybody in the opening videos, and I went back and watched mine, what I said about them. They kind of smack talked them. We're like, I don't know what they're thinking with all their picks. They ended up, they had, I think their blood economy was like twice the size of mine, or probably at least 50% bigger. These Diabolists who were super cheap running around blood hunting everywhere. And they had a ton of Aussies. They're doing, they had their vampires running around. They had Send Lesser Horror, a bunch of stuff. And then the Tuatha were super solid, the Tuatha Warriors. So, I don't know. These guys did very good calculated things all game, I thought. I think when they and the elves attacked me at the end, they weren't aggressive enough. Like and part of it was because their stuff was busy over here, because they were forced to attack us earlier than they wanted to. And so part of this, I think, is on them. Like, they should have they had plenty of time to finish all this stuff off. And I don't know all the, I don't have scouts over here because they would have all been patrolled out by the blood hunting things happening. But they should have been able to finish whatever their business was over here. It should have been finished by then. So I don't know why they weren't completely done. But if they had finished this stuff early and then had gotten this stuff back, they need to attack in basically full force at the same time as Vinland. I mean, the other option, which I was totally game for, was that this throne was going to go to El Shu, and we could be at peace until El Shu was finished, and then we could do like basically a 3v1 of them and them and them attacking us. And that would have been a fun thing to do too. But they wanted to fight sooner. They, ended their nap with me. But, I would have also been cool to wait till these guys finished, and then it would have been basically them owning Vinland or Vinland owning them, plus El Shu fighting me. But we would have been like basically maxed out on research and have more Long Dead production. So anyway, they didn't want to do that. They wanted to fight before those wars, which I think is probably the better choice. But they just didn't attack hard enough at the right time. But they had pretty cool tech. They could get almost all the buffs on their armies. And yeah. And the people were, I think, most confused by the Diabolist or whatever as their mage of choice, their runt mage. But I think it made sense. They were number one in research by the end of the game. They just had a super cheap spammable mage. And he was a very efficient blood hunter. And, if he needs to, he can jump in Sabbaths and do big fire magic. But he can also make lanterns, and they had tons of lanterns. I think that's why they were number one in research, and the fact this guy's so cheap. But yeah, I think they had an underappreciated roster. I think it was pretty good. It didn't scale quite as hard as ours, but it scaled pretty well because they had, a reign of murder kitties, and then a ton of blood magic. So it scaled well that way. Yeah. And then Ankaryarchos, I think they just didn't have a great answer to Sea of Ice. There was no way with Sea of Ice up to get Lace Dragonians out. We found some things I'll just mention at the end here about the global situation. So I thought that when I tried to put up Galegate, I put 300 gems in it. I thought it bounced off of Sea of Ice, which had a 300 casting. It didn't. They said that they only did like 170 in Sea of Ice, which was just above what they put in trying to dispel it. So apparently they just barely missed on the dispel, and that is another like alternate reality. Like what would have happened if Sea of Ice came down and they had dispelled it? Well, we know these guys probably would have put it back up. So there's that. But maybe they would have delayed a turn, and maybe the Underwater would have come and gotten this. I was fine. Honestly, if Underwater had asked, like, hey, dude, do you mind if we take this throne? They didn't even think to ask. I would have said, yeah. I mean, they didn't even know. I wasn't planning on keeping it. I was just holding on to it for El Shu. So they could have asked probably and been like if Sea of Ice came down there like, hey, we can stay at peace, but do you mind giving us like these two provinces? I probably would have said sure. I mean, why not? I was digging playing this. I didn't really want the game to end. I'm probably never going to get to play this nation again. So as soon as the game ends, I never get to play it again. But that's an alternate history. But that begs the question then, what did Galegate bounce off of? And it turns out Galegate bounced off of Wrath of God, which was cast by Mammon. And they never used their god after they cast Wrath of God because they didn't want it to come down. But they put around 300 in it. So when we put 300 in Galegate, we barely. So not only did we get unlucky, and target the only global which was capable of bouncing us, but we also only barely bounced it. If we had put maybe 20 or 30 more gems in it, we would have... It was only like 10%. It's one turn. Like if we waited one more turn, we would have taken down Wrath of God, which, I mean, the spell itself we didn't really care about. But we would have had Galegate up, which would have meant we could have unfurled our master plan, which was Dark Skies with a ton of Dom pressure. Which, looking at the graphs, Dominion pressure, you can see this is the blood sack thing that was starting to go crazy. And this choo-choo train probably wasn't going to stop. So anyway, I'm kind of sad we didn't get to do our final form, which was going to be, Dark Skies bullshit that we could do with Shaitans and things. But anyway, it was a fun game. It was a totally fun game. I'm a little sad I lost Zach close to the end. He, I think, got a little swamped with personal life and didn't have time to waste testing and scripting and Dominions anymore. But yeah, it was fun, guys. It was fun. So with that, yeah, the mod should be available if any of you guys want to try this out. Have people draft different nations. But I had a ton of fun. See you guys later.